Does the elimination of programs within the NCAA make winning a national championship in wrestling harder or easier than it did in Chael Sonnen and my day? Wow. I am a firm believer. And I hear your point. I don't see a lot to it, right? Getting a scholarship is harder. Getting a starting spot on a team is harder. Anytime you eliminate numbers, at least in theory, it eliminates competition. I'm a firm believer that though we hold on to the guys who came before us, we all look up to the guys that came before us. The reality is sport moves forward. The people that will argue Wilt Chamberlain was better than Michael Jordan or Michael Jordan is better than LeBron are not complimenting Wilt and they're not complimenting Jordan. They're saying basketball peaked several decades ago. I can tell you in the sport of wrestling, that is far from the truth. The techniques and the nuances only move forward. They only get more advanced. As the rules changes, it becomes more difficult. The lack of schools, the lack of opportunity, and lack of scholarships do make it more difficult to get in a singlet in the first place. But it does not reduce the difficulty of winning the ultimate prize, which is the championship. I hope that made sense. If Dan and Randy had come to me and they were going to fight each other and one of them asked me to corner, would have I done it? Yes, I would have. And it would have been whoever came to me first. Now, we, of course, would tell the other side, but you have to understand, Team Quest would have done that. Dan and Randy would have fought, and there would have been no hard feelings. They may have gone into practice together. They may have. Probably, in all fairness, that's how it would have been. Practice was every day at 3. We had one coach, the late, great Robert Follis, and they might have separated and not gone with each other. They might have gone as far as to split practice times. But 100% it still would have been our team. Nobody would have left. Nobody would have done anything different. So likely, yeah, I would have gone to just whoever came first. I don't have a preference in that race. But then like Nate Quarry or Chris Leben or Matt would have gone the other side. And we get 3 or 4 guys over here, and we're helping him get ready, and 3 or 4 over here. And as strange as that sounds, that actually got tested to some degree. Randy Couture was a student of Maurice Smith. Maurice Smith and Matt Hume were just up the road, right? We're in Portland over here, but about 3 hours up the road is where the AMC and Maurice Smith kickboxing was. AMC and Maurice Smith were, I think, even under one roof at one point, but right there in the same area, so guys could go back and forth. Randy was a student of Maurice Smith. Randy draws Josh Barnett. Josh Barnett was born and raised under the Matt Hume AMC system. Josh Barnett's there every single day. So when Randy starts going up there to get workouts, which is what he was doing regardless of opponent, he just kept doing the same thing. He would be in the same room as Josh. I never saw it with my own eyes, but I got a call from Dennis Hallman who did see it and said it was weird. Said it was a really weird thing. And he said after a workout, like a Friday night workout, the whole team even went out to a restaurant and ate together. And Josh is sitting over here and Randy's sitting over here. Different mindset. Not very many people could have done that. But at Team Quest, that would not have been a big deal at all. And you could tell the other guy, you wouldn't have to sit down. It wouldn't be this weird thing. Hey, Dan, I'm standing over here. Hey, Randy, I'm going to go help Dan getting ready for his fight. Okay, hey, have a great weekend. It just wasn't. Team Quest, it was just different. And it wasn't that we didn't have a bond and we weren't together. We grew up as wrestlers, and so we got tested on that. Team Quest went on to be a mixed martial arts gym. But it started... it was just wrestlers. It was just Dan and Randy, and then I tagged in. It was just Dan, Randy, and I for a year. Matt Lindland moves back from Nebraska. Now it's Dan, Randy, myself, Matt Lindland. And before we ever got our 4th or 5th or 6th student, it went on to have hundreds of members. But it was a wrestling gym. And that happened in wrestling. We would be training together, go to a tournament. You get in a bracket. You don't pick your opponent. You get in I draw Matt Lindland. I drew Matt Lindland first round of a tournament that my father paid to get Matt Lindland there. It was just the way it went. Got to the World Team Trials one year. Was it 2001 out in Minnesota? Dan Henderson was not going to wrestle that year. He had retired the year before, but he was in great shape because he was fighting at Pride. He got a plane and just flew in. He made the finals. He makes it to the finals. Matt Lindland had left the weight class. He was a silver medalist. Comes into this weight. They met up in the finals. That's 2 out of 3 in the finals. So they went at it twice, and Randy Couture was the mentor to Matt Lindland. They all own the gym. Dan, Matt, and Randy had a business going called Team Quest. Randy was the head coach of Matt Lindland for wrestling. Randy was the head coach of Dan Henderson for fighting. That's how that was looked at. Dan was Randy's fighter. Matt was Randy's wrestler. There was no hard feelings. That's exactly how it worked. I sat in the audience with my mom. I was in that bracket too. I had been eliminated. This was the finals. We were all in the same weight. So we could have all met up and matched up and gone to dinner after. We just never would have talked about it again. It's just the way it was, but it came from that mentality. So just to share with you, when we got into fighting, we had that same mentality. Anyone, anywhere, anytime, that it could include each other. A main and a co-main. All right, I get to do two. Look, anybody can do this, right? Anybody can sell a Ferrari. It's the good salesman that can move the used Volvo off the lot. So, I mean, look, real easy numbers. Sports' biggest star is Conor McGregor. Number 2 is Jorge Masvidal. Number 3 is anybody with the last name of Diaz. Good news, they're all the same weight. I mean, good news, they're all the same weight. I cannot believe the talk of getting Conor versus Masvidal in there has not happened. The whole reason Conor ever went to 170 pounds is because Dana White told TMZ one time. Dana was going to dinner in Beverly Hills. A guy jumps out with a camera that happens to be with TMZ, brings up Conor, brings up Masvidal, and then asks Dana on the spot, would you ever put them together? And Dana said no, Masvidal's too big. And he was. Masvidal's a good size 70-pounder. Conor was doing his work at 45 and then 55. It's like 52.5 for Floyd Mayweather, whatever garbage those guys agreed to, boxing crap. Masvidal was too big. Conor heard that, took that as a challenge, moved up to 170 to say that he wasn't. I think Conor should have got his way. Why would we not put our biggest star against our second biggest star? So there's my answer. I would put Conor McGregor against Jorge Masvidal. That wasn't creative by me. I took the biggest draw and I put him with the second biggest draw. But that's what you're asking me to do. So I would do that one more time, and I would put Francis Ngannou against Jon Jones. Now, Francis and Jon can't draw, but that's not because people aren't interested in them. It's because they don't know how or refuse to promote. So I would put them as a co-main. I would not put the great expectation on them, but there's only one mega fight at heavyweight. It's diminished a little bit. It's diminished, right? The old story of you're only as good as your last fight is very real. But that's still the biggest fight in the perennial division. You only gave me 2 options. That would be my order. Could an average person beat a trained MMA fighter of the same height and weight if the average person could use what's known as fouls in MMA, but the fighter had to follow the rules of MMA? I gotta tell you, I am so greatly offended by that question. I know that wasn't your intent. If you took a non-trained person and you put them against an MMA fighter who is trained, you could eliminate anything that you want from the MMA. You could say kicks only. You can punch and kick and gouge and bite and grapple. All I can do is kick you. The MMA fighter will destroy that person with only the kicks. If you said this is grappling only by you, but I can do absolutely everything without ever throwing a strike or hurting you in any fashion, the MMA fighter would subdue the other very quickly. So, no, just because they could cheat, what would that be? So you'd have groin shots, you could pull hair, you could eye gouge, and you could bite. If the MMA fighter can follow the unified rules, I mean, that sees 30 seconds if the MMA guy wants it to see 30 seconds, which he would. The MMA guy would come out and be very nice. He would be very generous. He would use what he learned. He would get control. He would stop the situation. He is not going to come out there. You're not going to have to deal with any of that. That's the answer. I'm a little surprised you didn't know that. I'm a little shocked that you did. It tells me that you've never sparred, and of course I'm not insulting you. If you sparred one day, you will never touch that fighter. You will never get a hand on him. How important is a sports psychologist? When competing with elite level competition, I think the sports psychology is very helpful anywhere. Now, whether you actually go in and see the psychologist, because there's connotations around that, and a lot of people see that as weakness. I know that firsthand because I did it. And when I did, I didn't want people to know. But sports psychology is a fascinating thing, right? the old adage, but there's strength in knowledge. It's very true. And anything that I've ever dealt with in my whole life that was my private secrets, because I knew I was the only one, so I didn't want anybody else to know I was dealing with it. As I got older, I realized we're all dealing with it. I'm not the only one with an anxiety. I'm not the only one with a fear. I'm not the only one that's second-guessing a rapper. They all are. Some guys are better actors, but we all feel the same thing inside. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I got out of college. I thought it was my secret. I was out of college for 3 or 4 years before I finally had a conversation with Chet McBee, a teammate of mine, who was a roommate of mine, and we had the exact same thing. I said, Chet, you felt that too? I felt that too. Then we started talking to other people, realized they all felt it, but nobody had told us. It's one of those things. So you go get a couple of books on this. You go read up a little bit on it. You start to, oh my God, this is just part of it. This is just a part of the game. But that gives you a strength, it gives you a power. So when it hits the day before, or it hits in the locker room the night of, you're not only not paralyzed by it, you expected it. It comes in, you say, there you are, old friend. I knew you'd show up sooner or later. It's one of those things. I had on my personal note, I had never lost a round. I had never even been in a fight that was remotely close. And I was only fighting top 10 guys. I was the guy whose career was very busy and I was getting more opportunities than anybody else, but I was only getting it because I would fight guys that nobody else would. I didn't lose a minute. I dominated these guys. Some of them I still see to this day that like to look at me like, hey, I got over on you. Man, I whipped your ass. You didn't touch me once. But I wasn't ready psychologically, and I found a way out of those fights. And that finally dawned on me. I was on SureDog.com. I was looking at my own record. So my goodness, every one of these losses is by submission. I never get submitted. I went to Abu Dhabi and never got submitted. Multiple times. I'd wrestled my whole life. I'd go to practice 2 hours a day, every day. When I tell you I never got submitted, nobody could tap me out. I would get tapped out in MMA, where it's hard to tap somebody out. Easy to tap somebody out in grappling. It's harder to do it when there's strikes involved. I was getting tapped out in fights that I was winning in the second round. And that was the key that jumped off the page for me. When I saw that the 3 matches I had lost, where I had never lost a round, not even a moment of the fight, was halfway through the fight, all by submission that I gave. I used to give guys submission. Something would happen, but you get scared. Fight or flight would come in. Sometimes you would choose to fight. You'd have a great relief when the contest was over. And the relief for me was never an excitement that I won or that I left healthy. It was that I didn't double-cross myself. Oh, thank goodness I didn't die. I fought through it tonight. And there was and it's only a moment. You let up for a moment. You could even come back. But you let up for that moment and the fight's over and get stuck. Right? It's one of those things. It was very frustrating. I went and saw a sports psychologist, and he was a hypnotist. And he hypnotized me. And I started going in twice a week, and that's when I went on my run. I never lost again at middleweight. Never lost a round, never lost a fight, went all the way to a world championship, had a world championship fight, never even lost a round. Find a way to lose the fight. But I never lost a round of the fight. And the only thing that I could put my finger on and say that I was doing differently, so I started paying attention to the sports psychology. If Chimaev crushes Burns, is he solidified as the real deal and as a contender for the belt? Yes, of course. Absolutely. If you beat a former champion in this sport generally, you will get an opportunity at the current champion. You back down that list, the next best thing to beating a champion is if you beat the former contender. If you beat a former #1 contender, you get a shot at the championship. It's not quite as strong and it's not quite as often, so I'm using a general statement, but Gilbert Burns is a #1 contender. Gilbert Burns could be the #1 contender today. If Leon got hurt in a short notice fight and they put Gilbert in, nobody's going to complain. We all agree on that? Of course. It makes perfect sense. He's tougher than all hell. And Chimaev is in a little bit of an unadvantageous spot, because what I said about if you can't get the champion, get a hold of a former champion, there's so much truth to that, but there aren't within this weight class. I mean, it's a little bit harder to find. You got RDA. I think that should count, but RDA did have that championship at 55. You have Colby, who had an interim belt, never lost, and all of a sudden doesn't have an interim belt. And no, that's not meant to be a confusing riddle. That happened. Lawler, for the most part, isn't fighting. I don't think Robbie's announced his retirement, but he most certainly hasn't announced an interest in doing another fight. T. Wood has left and is doing boxing / try. So you just don't have the former champions. You just don't have that same opportunity. So, of course, you would go to the next best thing, which is a former title challenger, and that's where Burns comes in. Now, nobody goes out there and whips Burns. Burns out-wrestled T-Wood. T-Wood is an all-American Division I wrestler. Burns is very hard to take down, is my point. Burns has a medal from the World Submission Championships, a bronze. So even if you get on the ground with Burns, you still got a big pain in your ass. So if Chimaev is to go out the way that Chimaev likes to go out, which is take somebody down quickly, keep them there, maul them in advanced position, oh yeah, that's going to jump off the page. Stylistically, everything you need to know about the strengths of Chimaev are going to be shown with Burns, and they're either going to pass the test or they're not, but that's the match. I do agree to that.